IPM technologies, IPM being integrated pest management. Paul is an entomologist in brackets extraordinaire, and since 1996 has been the owner and director of IPM Technologies based in Hurstbridge, Victoria. His major focus of Paul's work has been the implementation and adoption of IPM strategies. This has also involved a strong research component on the impact of pesticides on species of beneficial invertebrates. For many years, Paul's delivered a lecture series on entomology and IPM at La Trobe University in Melbourne, and now runs online courses in entomology for IPM technologies. He regularly works on IPM across Australia and New Zealand and occasionally other countries. So I welcome Paul to talk to us today about integrated pest management and specifically around the control of Helicoverpa, which is the Helicoverpa is the revised genus in relation to some of the caterpillars that some of you have been seeing just before harvest this year. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thanks, Brenda. Thanks for the invitation to talk to you, and I'll just add a couple of things about what I'm going to talk about and my little company. So IPM Technologies is a very tiny company. This is it. So there's me, and I'm in Melbourne, and Rebecca, who lives in Tasmania. So we don't sell any products at all. We don't sell insects, we don't sell chemicals, we don't sell anything. So the whole purpose of IPM Technologies is to help farmers to control pests with minimal use of insecticides. That's what we do. So we work all over Australia and New Zealand, as Brenda said, and we've worked over the years. I set up the company 28 years ago, and in that time we've worked in just about every crop that is grown in Australia. Not pistachios, but some of the ones here, a lot of horticultural crops, but also broadacre crops, tree crops, pastures. We've worked in all of those. We've developed IPM strategies for all of those. And the picture down at the bottom there is a couple of months ago I went to Colorado to help a grower, sweet corn grower, because he was having trouble with Helicoverpa. So it's relevant to today. So what we do a lot of the time is we work with farmers, but we also work with advisors, and a lot of times those advisors sell chemicals. But a lot of resellers have realised that instead of just selling cheap chemical, if they can sell good advice, then that's a lot better. So a lot of the resellers out there are pretty well informed with IPM. So unfortunately, why do people come to us? The most common reason is there's a crisis. I usually say people don't pick up the phone and say, "Hello, Paul, everything's good." It's usually, we've tried everything, nothing works, what do we do now? So if you can avoid getting into that situation, you're a lot better off, and I think that's certainly possible. So the most common reason for there being a crisis is where, if you've got a pesticide-based approach, which is what everyone with pest management is familiar with, if you're using pesticides and the pesticides stop working, you've got a problem. So the usual answer is use more of it, and it just gets worse and worse. The second point under that is secondary pests. So if you use the wrong pesticide, you actually make another set of problems, and it's not what you might think. Logically, if I'm applying a pesticide, I'm getting rid of pests, but you can actually create more and more problems. And those secondary pests can be very, very resistant to a whole range of insecticides, and so you get into sort of diabolical trouble. So sometimes all the help we need to give is just, what insect am I looking at? If people are used to killing everything and there's nothing there, when they stop spraying those broad spectrum insecticides, they see life in the crop. So these days everyone's got a camera in the phone in their pocket, so we get sent photos all the time. It's the easiest thing to do. Is this a pest? Is it a beneficial, or is it something else? So we help support decision making, and we can do that from, remotely. So Heliothis, or Helicoverpa, I'll call it Heliothis. It's a pest in a whole range of crops. So a couple of pictures here. There's a tiny little one in a pea pod. They're a pest of peas, they're a pest of tomatoes. Probably if you're a tomato grower in Victoria, Heliothis would be the #1 pest. If you grow cotton, it's not a pest anymore because all the cotton is genetically modified to kill caterpillars. But previously, before GM cotton arrived, if a chemical company produced an insecticide that killed Heliothis and they could put it into cotton, they would make more money in that market than everything else put together. Heliothis was a major pest. They were spraying maybe 14, 15 times per crop in the main production areas. And before the Horne River gave up growing some years ago, they might have been spraying up to 30 insecticides per crop. That's Heliothis. So you want to avoid getting into the trap of using a pesticide-based approach. It's also a problem in a lot of horticultural crops that we've dealt with, and it's a major problem in sweet corn. It's the #1 pest until fall armyworm arrived. And you've probably heard of fall armyworm. It's another caterpillar and it gets into sweet corn. So we've had to deal with it in Australia. I did that quite a lot last year and I'll come to that again at the end. So this is what the adult moth looks like. If you look at it closely, they've got green eyes. It's unusual for moths to have green eyes, but Heliothis have green eyes. And the little white thing in front of it here, that's a moth egg. So the moths, male and female moths fly in, and the females lay eggs, and that's the starting point. So if you can pick up the flight of the moths, and so they're moving into your farm from other areas. They will be moving in from other crops. They will be moving in from native bushland. So there's a range of places they can come from. And the easiest way to pick them up is with pheromone traps. So the pheromones are the scents given off by the female to attract the male. So what it does is it traps males, and so you can see if there's movement through. So there's a couple of sorts of traps here. You probably need something like this bucket trap on the right. The one on the left is just a sticky trap in a cardboard cover. It's really good in vineyards for things like white brown apple moth or maybe codling moth if you're worried about that. But they're small moths, and so they get stuck to the sticky base. So there's a limit of how many moths you can catch on that sort of trap. So Heliothis are reasonably large, about 2-3 centimetres long, so you're only going to fit so many on there, and then it won't catch any more. So if you have pheromone traps out and you check them once a week, say, more if you want, but you'll be able to see, is there a movement in? Then you could start to look for eggs. The eggs are about the size of a grain of sand, but a white egg on a dark green leaf is actually pretty visible. So there's 2 Heliothis eggs there on a celery leaf. I hope you'll agree, you can see those. So they're small, but if you're looking for them, so instead of combing every week looking through the plants, if you've got the pheromone trap, that tells you, all right, there's been a flight, somewhere in the last 7 days if you're checking once a week. So the eggs change colour after they're laid. So if they're freshly laid, they're pure white. If they have a brown ring, they're just about to hatch. So the brown ring in the egg is the caterpillar inside the egg, so you can actually see into it. So if the pheromone traps are picking up a flight, let's say you check it every Monday, if there was a flight the day after you checked it, all the moths would have laid eggs and they hatch in about 4 or 5 days. So you need to look pretty quickly. But if the flight was yesterday, then the moth egg lay might be just happening. So it's a guide. So the Helicoverpa caterpillars look like this. The colour is really variable. So they can be very pale, they can be green, they can be brown. It's all the same species. There's just a lot of variation. So this is a typical Helicoverpa caterpillar. But of course, when they hatch out of an egg, they're very small. So when I say small, this is small. So it's actually easier to see the eggs than the just hatched caterpillars. So the combination of a pheromone trap and monitoring for eggs is pretty good. So that gives you early warning, because if you did want to put an insecticide out, and I'll come to that at the end, it's much easier to kill something this size than something that size. So, and of course, if they're getting into your fruit or nuts at the early stage, you want to kill them when they're this size, not wait until they're. So the next important thing is there's 2 species. So one is a native species, it's Helicoverpa punctigera, and there's a species, it's been here for many, many years, originally came in from overseas, is Armigera. The difference is the arrow on that picture on the left is pointing to an area on the caterpillar where, can you see that there's a little cluster of black? These things here. Can anyone see that? Yes. The native species don't have that. So that's how you can tell the caterpillars apart. There's a very practical reason for doing this, and that's because if you are going to apply some insecticides, punctigera, the native one, is really easy to kill with just about anything, but Armigera is really difficult to kill. So you have to be very careful with what you choose to use, and I'll come to that at the end. Oh, and I should have said right at the start, if you want to ask anything or stop me as I am going along, don't wait till the end. Just.
All right. So is that Armigera just because of resistance to a number of chemicals over the years, or is it an adaptation from that caterpillar?
It's got resistance over the years to multiple insecticides.
Okay, so multi-resistant.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's probably intrinsically tougher as well.
Okay.
But it's got resistance to all the major chemical groups.
So we've selected beautifully for an insecticide resistant.
Absolutely.
Okay. We've done well again.
Yes. So we now we've created a problem that's harder than it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is an answer, so don't despair. So there's 2 species, and the only reason for saying that is if you're tempted to use a cheap broad-spectrum insecticide, it'll kill punctigera, it will do nothing to Armigera, except create problems. But there's another couple of caterpillars species that are pests in nuts, and if Helicoverpa, like Helicoverpa in pistachios, I think it's an unusual thing, not been seen. You might want to just have a look and see if there's any issues with either carrot moth, which is this one, and codling moths. So both of those get into walnuts or almonds. And Carpophilus beetles are problems in other industries. Again, once people start spraying for these things, you're on a downhill run, I think.
You also get white brown apple moth, I think, as well.
Okay.
That has been around over the years.
Yeah.
Just every now and then.
Yeah.
Especially when you get a very tight bunch. So that was.
Yeah. So light brown apple moth's a leaf roller, so if they get into a bunch, they'll bind them all together.
They'll crash it up,
Yeah. So it's a problem in viticulture because that brings botrytis in and so lots. But those delta traps, the little cardboard traps, they're good for monitoring light brown apple moth. You don't need a big pan trap for that. So how do you control them? So in my view, it doesn't matter what the crop is, there's only 3 ways you can control any pest in any crop. And that's biological control, which are the insects and mites that eat the pest insects and mites. Then there's cultural controls, which are what you do as the manager that impacts either the pests or the beneficials. So you can make life worse for the pest or better for the beneficials. So if light brown apple moth is an example, if you have a lot of capeweed, you've got a really good overwintering source for light brown apple moth. You get rid of the capeweed, you lower the pest issue. Providing a nectar source for beneficials can really increase their impact. So they're cultural controls. And the last one is pesticides. So IPM, the really simple definition of it is to try and use all of those 3 things in a compatible way. So instead of relying just on biological control or just on pesticides, you've got 3 options that you can integrate. So what I want to do now is just show you some pictures, basically, of some of the biocontrols that we've seen in a lot of crops, and you would have some of these or their equivalents. So I'm just going to show you some examples. And the biological controls can be either predators or parasites. So the predators are those things that walk up, eat their food, and you can see the result. The parasites live inside the body of their hosts. So predators. The ladybird here, this is the adult. Everyone recognises ladybirds. This is the juvenile stage of ladybird. So they look nothing like the adults, but if you want to see their impact, it's actually, and you want to see a population developing, it's the juveniles that do most of the feeding. And there's a lot of different sorts of ladybirds. This is a standard one in Victoria, the transverse ladybird. But we also get really tiny ladybirds. This little black one is the size of a pinhead. So it's really small. But what it eats is mites. And so there's a picture of a mite here, and there's some mite eggs. It's a fantastic predator. And so in a lot of fruit crops, the end of summer you get mite flare, 2-spotted mite is a problem. You'll find these ladybirds cleaning them up. So they're there all the time, and they're generalist predators. The juveniles, once again, look nothing like the adults, and they're absolutely tiny, but they're voracious predators of mites. There's a whole lot of other predatory beetles, not just ladybirds, and these are 2 that you would find in abundance around here. So the one on the left has a very inventive name of red and blue beetle. I didn't give it that name, that's what it's called. It's a predator, and it probably eats moth eggs. In this case, that's why it's relevant. The one on the right, you see in huge clouds at times, it's called a plague soldier beetle. So it's olive green on its back and it's bright yellow underneath. And you see lots of them. So both, they're just examples of many, many species of predatory beetles. Hoverflies, you would have all seen hoverflies, they hang still in the air over flowers. They're not predatory as adults, they're nectar feeders, which is why they're over the flowers. But the juvenile stages are maggots, so this thing here is a juvenile hoverfly. And they like eating soft-bodied things like aphids, but they'll eat other things like little caterpillars as well. That maggot there would be quite capable of eating all those aphids on its own. So they will eat hundreds. They're often overlooked because they start off really tiny, but when you see them, you know, they could be a centimetre or more long as a larva. So they're there. One of the most abundant predators we have is brown lacewings. These are native species. The adults are predatory. The juveniles are smooth. They're sort of sometimes described as like insect crocodiles. And they've got a big pair of jaws at the front, and the jaws are hollow, and they just grab their food and suck the liquid contents out. They're good, aren't they? Had morning tea. There's another sort of lacewing which is probably more important for you, but it's not an absolute distinction. The green lacewings are more likely to be found in tree crops and vines, and the brown lacewings more likely down low, but there is overlap. The green lacewings aren't predatory as adults, but they're bigger, they're more obvious, they come to light at night. The juveniles have the same big hollow jaws at the front, but they're not smooth bodied, they have spines on their backs, and whatever they've eaten last, they pile onto their backs. I think I've got a photo in a minute of that. But they lay their eggs on stalks, and so if you're looking for green lacewings, the picture on the left shows a whole lot of hatched green lacewings. So once again, you can tell by the colour, if you're monitoring and you want to know, are they going to do something or have they already been and gone? When the eggs are freshly laid, they're almost lime green. Then just before they hatch, they're a grey colour. And then if they're all white, it's just empty eggshells. So you can, if you're monitoring and you want to keep an idea of, are they fresh ones or have they been there for ages, you look at the colour. The picture on the right shows a whole lot that have a synchronised emergence. So these are the tiny little lacewings that have just popped off out of their eggs. They have that synchronised emergence probably because they sit there for an hour or so and their cuticle hardens up. If they didn't do that, the first one out would eat all the others. So they all hatch at the same time and they scatter. And this is a green lacewing larva that's had a lot of meals of aphids, and it's eating another one. So if you see a piece of fluff walking around on the leaf, it's probably a green lacewing larva. So they're probably some of the most important predators that you'll have for a whole range of things, and certainly in viticulture they're the major biocontrol agent for light brown apple moth and mealybugs. And they eat a whole range of things that's eating an apple dipped in So, yeah.
What about earwigs? Are they a predator?
So European earwigs are the most common one. They're predatory and they're plant feeding. So you've got to weigh it up. But if you're growing fruit, they're probably more of a pest than a beneficial. So they will, but they're omnivores. They will eat, aphids and apple aphids and things like that. But if they damage your fruit, you're probably the same. There's native species that most are ground dwelling that are predatory, but they won't be going up into the trees. So the other group of biocontrol agents are the parasitoids, and these are hidden for most of their life, so they're almost always underestimated significantly. So this is a little video I've got of a tiny little wasp parasite that is going to sting an aphid. So if anyone's got rose bushes that got aphids on them, this is the process you want to watch. So this is a female wasp that's going to sting this very worried aphid. He knows what's going to happen. That's it. So there's now an egg inside the aphid, the egg hatches into a maggot. The maggot eats the aphid from the inside until all that's left is its cuticle, which the wasp uses to make its own pupal case. So it's not an aphid anymore, it's a wasp. And it cuts an emergence hole, and out of that comes one wasp. So the cycle continues. But until a day or two before that, you wouldn't have known. It would have looked like a healthy aphid. So a lot of people with rose bushes and aphids, they say we don't want to spray them, so we go out and squash them. So all they're doing is squashing the parasites inside, and so never get control.
What's the time frame between laying the egg and hatching?
Depends on the temperature, but probably about between 7 and 10 days. But so you'll see what looks like a healthy aphid, then it'll look a bit distended, and then it'll go into like a golden ball. And so if you see those puffed up balls, they're parasitised. And if it's got a hole in it, the wasp has already come out. If there's no hole, the wasp is still in there. So that's an example of a parasite, or a parasitoid. A parasitoid is just a term, it's an insect that parasitises another insect. And the smallest insects we have in Australia are parasitoid wasps. And they parasitise moth eggs, or the other things, but moth eggs amongst them. So there's two photos here of the same mass of moth eggs. The one on the left was taken a few days before the one on the right. And so if you remember the photo of the Helicoverpa egg, it's about the size of a grain of sand. A wasp with wings will come out of every one that's turned black. And you can see they've all turned black. So the wasp that attacked these eggs got 100%. So this is a wasp called Trichogramma. So it's tiny. I took these photos of these tiny little wasps emerging out of a massive moth eggs. So you would never see them. There's no way you could see that. But you can see black eggs. So if you're monitoring for Helicoverpa and Helicoverpa eggs, looking at the colour is really important. If they're black, there's never going to be a caterpillar. So they kill them before the caterpillar stage. Just show.
Helicoverpa always laid in masses?
No, that wasn't Helicoverpa.
Oh.
So they were cutworm eggs, but each individual egg is the same.
So they're usually single eggs?
They're usually single eggs. There can be, 4 or 5 laid on a leaf, but they're always separated. And so you can buy Trichogramma wasps and release them. I'm not suggesting you do that, but they're produced to control moths in the egg stage. There's other wasp parasites. I'll just show you a couple of examples where they kill the caterpillars. So Trichogramma kills the eggs. This is a wasp that parasitises one of the major pests we have in the country at the moment, which is diamondback moth. It only feeds on brassicas. The trouble is, if you're monitoring and you find a caterpillar, you think, all right, you need to do something. How do you tell if it's parasitised or not? Because if it's parasitised, you don't need to do anything. But if it's not parasitised, it's going to be a problem. So, believe it or not, the parasitised ones look healthy. You can't tell whether this is parasitised or not. What you need to do is pull it apart. If you pull it apart, if it's got a maggot inside it, it'll look like that jelly bean there. That's the wasp maggot that is going to turn into a wasp. So that caterpillar would have died. In this case, you get one wasp out of one caterpillar. So Helicoverpa has its own parasites as well, same thing. Anyone that grows brassicas in their backyard, veggie gardens, might have cabbage white butterfly. So cabbage white butterfly is a much bigger caterpillar that eats brassicas. And so the wasp that attacks this doesn't lay one egg, it lays 25 eggs inside. So if you pull a cabbage white apart, you might find 25 maggots inside. And these ones don't wait until the caterpillar is ready to be paid before they kill it. They start coming out while the caterpillar is still alive. No children present. It's quite aggressive. So the wasps are emerging, and as they come out, what they're doing is spinning their own pupal cases, and so the caterpillar is still alive at this point, but only just. And at the end of the process, there's this mass of yellow things, which a lot of people think are eggs, but actually wasp pupae, and the wasps that come out of them are shown there. So that once was a cabbage white butterfly caterpillar. All caterpillars, every caterpillar, including Heliothus, has a range of wasps that
Is it the
attack.
Cortesia wasp?
That's Catesia. There's two species of Catesia that get them. One kills it in the young stage, and there's only one. But this is the other. So yeah, it's a Catesia. I'll just show you one last one. I think it's quite interesting. This is a common looper caterpillar, and the wasp that attacks this is polyembryonic. So the wasp lays one egg, and that egg divides like identical twins, but it does so between 500 and 1,000 times. So each one of those little bumps will be a wasp. So this is a Petri dish that's about the size of a 50-cent piece, and these are the wasps that come out of it. So that thing there is all that remains of the caterpillar. But you can see they're tiny. But the reason for showing you these things is they're not rare, they're not uncommon, they're just not usually seen. They're all there, but they're hidden inside the hosts. As well as predators and parasites, there's pathogens. And so some of these have been formulated as sprayable insecticides. So there's various fungi. That's a caterpillar that's been infected by a fungus. So it's not that it's died and it's gone mouldy. The fungus has killed it. There's viruses, which are pathogens. And the most relevant one here is this is a Heliothus caterpillar that's been killed by Vivus. So Vivus is a virus that is produced commercially, and what it does is turn the caterpillar into a bag of virus particles, such as like soup, and it just drips all over the canopy. And so if it rains or there's overhead irrigation, it splashes around. So it's unlike a chemical which would wash off or degrade over time, if you put the virus in and get it established, you can actually increase the amount of virus in the crop. So for you, Vivus will kill Heliothus and nothing else. It'll kill both species of Heliothus, and it's very good at it, but it won't kill loopers, it won't kill cutworm, it won't kill light brown apple moth. So you have to know that it's Heliothus that you want to kill. And there's bacteria, and the most common bacterial spray is one called dipel. So it works in a similar way to the virus, but in this case it would work against Heliothus punctigera quite well, but probably not so much on armigera. And if anyone wants it, we've got a one-page note on how to use a BT sprays. It's really easy to make them fail. You have to do certain things to make it work. I can email that to you and you can pass it on. So they're the biological controls. The cultural controls are anything that you can do, as I said, that impact pests or beneficials. And one thing, and you probably do this for other reasons, but what you're doing is having an impact on the pest management. So providing a food and shelter for beneficials is one. Providing weed control is another. Hygiene is another. It's anything that you can think of. If you had mealybugs, controlling ants is probably the first thing you need to do, because they guard mealybugs, scale insects, they guard them against the predators. So providing a nectar source is one way of encouraging beneficial species. This is on an advanced tree nursery we worked with. The farm manager there said, like, it's all dark. There's no flowers on his property, but he gets aphids and he wants hoverflies and wasps to attack them. So what he did was planted a bin of flowers and he moved it around with his forklift to wherever he had an aphid problem, and it attracted in the parasites and the hoverflies. How much difference does it make? I had a student look years ago at the parasite of diamondback moth. How long does it, what difference does it make? So if the wasps only get a water feed, no sugar, they might live for 2 days, and in that time they can sting so many caterpillars. But if she gave them a nectar source, instead of 2 days, they would live between 60 and 90 days. So it's not just a bit more, it's a massive amount more. And so that nectar source can be achieved in various ways. In tree crops, the interrow is where often people have mixed plantings of things, and if you deliberately plant things that flower, they don't have to be up this high. They can still be flowering at this height. Organic growers overseas use this method in protecting, providing a nectar source for beneficials. This is it's either around Shepparton or Cochrane. Once again, the interrow, having a grassy interrow is a massive help if that can be achieved. But also tree spacing, canopy management, all these things have an impact on pest and beneficial populations. So you remember a few years ago when we had that week where it was up over 40 degrees, properties like this that had good grassy interrows, and some even had overhead irrigation which maintained a higher humidity, they had no mite problems. But others where there was dust, things that weren't quite right, they had to start spraying for mites. So just what you probably do for other reasons is going to have an impact on pest populations. So the tree spacing, the tree height, they're particularly important in things like macadamias, avocados. So in the Northern Rivers area, we saw a lot of macadamia farms, really tall trees, so tall that they probably couldn't spray the pests up the top anyway because it was too high. But it meant that the trees were shading the interrow, so there was no grass in the interrow, there was no alternative food source, there was no way a population of predators could establish down the bottom. So the unpalatable answer was for farmers to chop half their trees down and chop the rest down by 2/3. No one wants to do that. Some do, and the only reason is to get better pest management. That's a good comment. So the last control option is pesticides. And so the difference between an IPM strategy and maybe a conventional spray program, which I know you don't use, is that in an IPM system, the bulk of the control is achieved with the biological control and the cultural control. And the pesticides are only used when necessary to support that. Sometimes it's necessary. So we want to know, does the pesticide, what impact does it have on beneficial species? So we've done a lot of research over the years so we can answer those questions. But I want to show you now the background level of biological control that you will be getting, probably without knowing it, we were looking at a potato crop with a farmer I've worked with for many, many years, and we advise him on whether he needs to spray an insecticide, and almost never does he put an insecticide on. But he has a regular spray program for disease control. So he sprays a fungicide, and he often gets a plane to come and do it for him. And on one occasion, we had an accidental trial site created because he wanted a fungicide sprayed called ACE, ACE. And so he sent an email off to the aerial operator and said, please come and spray my crop with ACE, except he made a spelling mistake. X and C are next to each other on the keyboard. He pressed X instead of C. And so his email read, please come and spray my crop with AXE, which is a synthetic pyrethroid. It's a broad spectrum insecticide. The plane came and did what he asked. He smelt it, he got on his phone, he called it off, by which time it had sprayed half a paddock. And so we had this accidental trial site. We monitored either side, and we counted the level of aphids in the crop. This graph here shows the percentage of leaves that had aphids before and after, after that spray on either side of the paddock. The blue line is the side that got sprayed with the synthetic pyrethroid. And it took 4 weeks, and then every leaf we turned over had aphids on it. The other side of the paddock, it didn't have anything. Why is that? I think what happened was this, imagine a potato crop. It's pretty dense foliage, ultra low volume spray with a plane. The insecticide didn't get to where the aphids were originally, which was down on the underside of the lowest leaves. But it did do a very good job of killing all the things I've just shown you. The parasitic wasps, the hoverflies, the lacewings, the ladybirds, they were all wiped out. So we had 2 generations, I think, one there and then another one there with no biological control. So this graph here is showing you very accurately what happens when you disrupt naturally occurring biological control. So, does that make sense? Yeah. So that's one leaf with aphids. That's the level of the problem that it caused. So in this case, it wasn't a disaster for him. There was no virus present, but if aphids vectoring virus, if he'd been, a seed grower, that would have been a disaster. So there's a whole lot of things that we call secondary pests. Aphids, thrips, mites, mealybugs, whitefly, scale. Think about where they occur, and they're often, to us, induced pests because the insecticide targeting a primary pest is killing the things that controls these. So if you're not spraying insecticides routinely, you're probably getting a tremendous amount of biological control naturally, and the last thing you want to do is to induce a set of problems like this. I put these in because I mentioned Heliothis before, and the level of control that was attempted in cotton before genetically modified plants arrived. Went up here. This is when they gave up on the Horne River, and this is when GM cotton arrived. But before that, this increase in the amount of pesticide being sprayed on cotton was just going up and up. All of it at Heliothis. So last year, I spent a fair bit of time looking at sweet corn in New South Wales. Number 1 pest was Heliothis. The second pest was fall armyworm. So I worked with a company here. This is just out of Bathurst. And we just got the farm advisors, the farm managers, to understand what they were looking at. And there were beneficials there. They didn't use any synthetic chemicals until maybe 1 or 2 sprays right at the end of the season, only on some crops. And they got total control of Heliothis pretty much using the virus spray. So they applied that through centre pivots, which gave them really good coverage. But all we did was go there and show them. See these pheromone traps? I wanted them to put the pheromone traps out for fall armyworm and Heliothus. But for some unknown reason, it took them about 3 months before they got around to putting them out. And in a crop like this, that was just about to be harvested, there were no real problems with fall armyworm. There were no problems with Heliothus, but they'd only put sprays on for Heliothus. And the assumption was there was no fall armyworm around. But when they finally put the pheromone traps out, they filled them in 2 days. There was a massive amount of fall armyworm there, but there were so many beneficials in the crop that they were getting grazed off. And so it actually didn't even need a spray in many examples. That's just to show you what can happen. That's the level of biological control that can contribute. So we've got 2,000 hectares of sweet corn, which is good. Everyone's happy. Somehow, a farmer in Colorado found me. I talked to him over the internet, gave him a talk like this. And a week later, he said, "Have you got any questions?" He said, "Yes. Can you come over next week?" Went over. He was spraying synthetic pyrethroids at least on a 3-day interval, probably down to an interval of 12 hours, and losing the crop. This is Heliothus. So the change he had to do was massive. So when I got home, because of the time difference, after I got back, I'd turn my phone on in the morning and there'd be between 5 and 25 WhatsApp messages from him. And he was very worried because it was so different. But he's now got control, the season's just finished, everything's good. So in pistachios, how do you work out a pest management strategy? I'd suggest you do something like this. First thing is to list all the pests. And if Heliothus is the only pest, that's fine, but if there's others, you need to add them in. Because whatever you're spraying for any pest is going to potentially impact the beneficial species. So think about what cultural controls there are. To me, the most obvious ones are dust control, providing a nectar source if that's possible. And there's 3 pesticides, I think you said.
We've got emergency permits for all 3 of them.
So the difference between these 3, Dipel is the bacterial spray. It'll kill Puntigera. Probably you won't get great results with Armidra unless you use a really high rate. Vivus is the virus. It will kill both species of Heliothus. So a bacteria and a virus. Altacor is a synthetic chemical, but it's in a group that has minimal impact on beneficial species. Dipel and Vivus are degraded by ultraviolet, and so the timing and application methods is really critical, and you can talk to anyone that wants about that. But Altacor is not so sensitive, so if you wanted to, if you said the UV problems are too much, you can use a chemical that is not going to degrade. But the main thing is, don't use a cheap chemical. Some of these are expensive compared to, like Axe. You saw what happens if you spray Axe. You're going to make a whole lot of other problems. Then you'll end up with a whole lot more pests, and you'll do a lot more spraying, and the cycle continues. So to me, it's like you're in a fantastic position because you're not routinely spraying, you don't have secondary pests, and the value in avoiding such problems so that you don't have to call me and say things are bad. You can avoid all those problems, and there's a big benefit in doing that. That's the last slide that I've got. So I think there's time for questions if anyone wants to. I'll be around for another couple of hours if people catch me up.
I've got a fairly simple question. In terms of cost, have you ever sat down and worked out, okay, because I mean the synthetic insecticides are fairly expensive, but I know IPM can also get up there as well. So have you done numbers on how much it costs and done a comparison and said, you know, how much you, I mean, in the long run, obviously the IPM strategy is better, I'd say, but have you ever done that and just sat down and worked it out?
Yeah, we've done it, but never been happy that we can convince people straight off to buy. But if you think of those secondary pests and avoiding the problems, so broadacre growers, I was in Western Australia a few months ago talking to broadacre growers in meetings like this, and at the end I said, all right, who's going to give it a try? You know, and in about 4 meetings I've talked to 60 growers. How many do you reckon were willing to give IPM a try?
No.
Yeah,
One.
I was going to say broadacre growers.
I should have left the N out.
Yeah, and he was a grower and an agronomist, and he was prepared to take the risk on his own farm, but he wasn't prepared to give advice. No. But the reason I worked out was because they've used a synthetic pyrethroid for so long, they have never seen a predatory insect or mite in there, and so they just don't trust biological control to be there. So the first step is the hardest. But those cheap synthetic pyrethroids might only cost them $7 per hectare, but they have now got resistant red-legged earth mite, resistant lucerne flea, bryopia mite, Belaustian mite, which they have to spray for every year continuously. So is that a cheap insecticide? I don't think so. You know, they're now dealing routinely with a whole set of problems that they don't have to. So the price, look at the price. To me, it's don't look at the price per litre of pesticide. Look at the overall cost of pest management over a period of time.
Yeah, that's what I wanted you to say. Thank you.
Okay.
Right, but because it's really, I mean, I agree with you. It's really easy to look at, okay, I can spray it and it solves it.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of work with almonds as well, and we had a lot of trouble where we come in and we might use a miticide, and you get a population explosion, and you're trying desperately to say that, you know, just hold fire, just try and stay behind and wait and wait and wait.
Yeah.
Eventually a grower will find the temptation too much. Exactly right, Pete. Eventually they can't help themselves. And then you know full well that you may then be dealing, that will bryopia mite, you deal with that, but then you might end up with 2-spotted, and then you have got a problem.
Yeah.
So then you're just getting that vicious cycle and around you go. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. It's cheap,
Yeah.
but think of the long haul.
Yeah. So if you can fill out that 4-column table.
Can we bring that up again?
Like mites shouldn't be there, you know.
Yeah.
The mites, 2-spotted mite in apples and so on wasn't even listed as a pest before DDT occurred. You know, it's an induced pest. So
What's the range of the moth-related heliocovers?
the range.
Yeah, how far do they fly? What sort of...
They regularly go from Victoria to Tasmania.
Right.
So it's not that they're just breeding up locally. They can do that, you know, but it's most likely they're moving on northerly winds, and you know, so we usually see flights in Victoria and Tasmania where there's a north wind in spring, summertime, and it's usually Puntigera first and Armigera second, but that's changing. But they can
So if you have a grower within a region, and it's a region, now let's say a sub-region, and you have one guy that sees it, if you would then be saying, okay, we've got that in one particular space, would you then be concerned about the whole region in terms of that pest? Or, because that's what I think Terry's getting at, is how far would you expect a population to fly?
Yeah, I think the broadacre farmers and other sort of allied groups, some of the chemical companies, some of the advisors, they have a network of pheromone traps.
Yep.
And they distribute that information because you can see it move. But to me, it's almost like thunderstorms. You know, so just because it's on one farm doesn't mean the next farm will have it, and vice versa. But over a district, you can see a movement through it.
The pest
One
called,
person, sorry, Ian's talking,
Oh.
sorry.
No, you can go.
the pest called weed, you haven't got anything IPM on weeds yet, have you?
So I work on insects. Don't ask me about mice and birds. They've got bones, and so I don't.
I suppose the only thing you could put it in would be perhaps sheep.
Yeah, I mean, there's ways like of weed management, and you know, some people use sheep. In West Australia, in vineyards, they've got short-legged sheep. I'm not joking, so that they can't reach the vines, but they can control all the stuff underneath.
We've got a neighbour who's got those of his pistachios.
Yeah.
His short-legged sheep.
Short-legged sheep. Sorry.
All I was going to say was, being a crop that we don't have to harvest by picking up off the ground is a big advantage, isn't it? Because we can have that inter-row planting, and you know, the weeds can be beneficial if we sort of interplant that with the right ones, can't we?
Yeah,
So-
I think so.
Yeah,
And even in, you know, macadamias where they drop to the ground, where possible now, they have a very thin strip of
Interrow.
interrow
Yeah.
and bare on the sides. So, but when I say, you know, some cover, it doesn't even have to be green all the way through, you know, if
Yeah.
water's an issue, but just not dust. And it doesn't have to be this high, you know, it can be
Yeah.
this high. So,
do you find that if it's any type of flowering weed, it'll be nectar, or are there some that,
there's some that are better than others.
Yeah,
But
so
usually the
just-
small flowers.
yeah, so the more, yeah, just target the more nectar orientated.
Yeah, yeah. So things like aniseed weed, or you know, the great big flowers, but they're actually made up of hundreds of tiny little flowers.
Yeah.
So they provide a good nectar source for the tiny little wasps and things, but the larger pests can't
Yeah.
get in it, so you're not feeding up the pests.
Do you know if the local pests over where we are, you know, gazania or African daisy, is that has that got a nectar in it?
Yeah, daisies generally do, you know, so some people plant them deliberately
Yeah.
for that.
No, just they'll grow out of gravel, you know, they they're just, that'd be an easy thing to, yeah.
You just want to make sure you're not bulking up the pests, so just do it.
Yeah, like there's a pest that likes them too.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Question for Chris?
Just a comment, we all hopefully remember that 4 or 5 years ago, the PGA commissioned a big survey of insects in our orchards. And a couple of outcomes of that were, one, we didn't find any horrible pests, we didn't find Helicoverpa senador. We did find some carrot moth, some carpophilus, which of course are big deals with almonds, but in fact they weren't a commercial pest as far as pistachios are concerned. I think there's some reasons for that. The shell of pistachios is a little bit better than almonds. But the two things that came out of that report, to my memory, one, at the same time, Stuart Pettigrew, who did that report for us, he was also doing a similar one with almonds. And one of the things that struck him was in pistachio orchards, the extraordinarily high level of predators in pistachio orchards compared to a low level of predators in almond orchards. And I think you've just explained why that happens. So, although we're now finding insects for the first time, we're at least starting, unlike some of your broad acre growers who have, you know, basically sterilised their properties. We've actually got the basis of an IPM program in that we've got a lot of predators there to start with. Let's make sure we keep them. The other thing that was in that report was we actually commissioned a supplementary report on which are the best sorts of beneficials to attract, which are the best sort of plants, which will attract beneficials. At Kylite, we've done this as a trial. I can't tell you the success rate. I can tell you that we did have only one load of ours was affected by Helicoverpa, and very low level, but nevertheless we had it. We have also had light brown apple moth, which we think we have successfully treated with importing the wasps, the trichogrammas. But I think that we've got the basis of a lot of predators in our orchards. Let's keep them there. Let's try and get rid of this problem. I suspect we've been the victims of a flight through of Helicoverpa, because clearly the Helicoverpa loves pistachio. You've seen the feeding photographs of them, they're voracious. They just eat the hull and then eat the kernel. They're not picky what they eat the lot. But if we don't get control of this, we're in deep diabolical trouble with consumers, because we can't separate them out. And the first time you find that the insect has eaten half the nut is when you crack it open. And they don't like that. They don't like half-eaten fruit. Consumers, they're picky, they don't like it. So I think we've got a chance of controlling this. And I guess what we've now become after 40 years, like every other bloody farmer in Australia, we've got to deal with insects. And pretending they're not there isn't going to work. We're going to have to do something about it, but frankly, I don't think we're going to do a lot less than growers of other crops have to do. I mean, that's just 30 times a season you're spraying something every 12 hours. Let's not go there. But when I think Kelsey is talking about the new website today, that when she does, on the new website, there'll be a particular reference to this paper by Stuart Pettigrew on the insects and his findings of what we found. But critically, there is the list of plants which are recommended as attracting good guys.
Not only that, you've got biological surfaces in Loxton, so you've got your beneficial insect breeders, quite local.
I should emphasise, you've got a really good situation, and most of these beneficials will be there as well. If you have to buy some, you can, but you shouldn't have to, and the trichogramma, they occur naturally, but if you want to buy them and release them, the trickiest thing is, if you find a flight, they have to sting the egg. Once the egg hatches into a caterpillar, they do nothing. So you've got to ring up, order them, get them to your place, put them out. They've got to emerge all before the egg hatches. So the timing is the biggest problem.
Is it possible to build a population of those by buying them in, or do you have to buy them in every year?
No, they only live in the eggs, so you have to have the pest. So you can't carry over a pop. You can with the generalist predators, but the specific parasites you can't. But you can have a very healthy level of other generalist predators like hoverflies, lacewings, things like that.
Yeah, stink bugs.
So stink bugs, there's some major pests, so things like green veggie bug, small potato bug, stink bugs, and they're problems. But there's other species that are predatory, and they just look slightly different, and they're usually brown.
Yeah.
But they eat caterpillars. They love caterpillars. I think I'll be out of time.
Yeah, so thanks very much, Paul. That's a brilliant talk. You're staying for lunch, I believe. Till after lunch, so please have a chat if you'd like to, and thanks for the offer of sending us that fact sheet on how to use the pathogens effectively. I think it was around dipel specifically, the variant. So that's great.